All right, let's get going. And we're off. First of all, thanks everyone for coming. I know it's the last session of the conference. Took a fair amount of energy. I'll try and keep this relatively painless. First off, I'm Dharmesh. For those that are tweeting, there's that extra H after the D, so don't let that trip you up. And I'm a hackerpreneur, which is a combination of a hacker and an entrepreneur. And one really quick disclaimer, or actually a couple of disclaimers, I'm a geek. I'm not a professional speaker. I'm not an affiliate marketer, but people just like you have said the ideas and data that I've shared has been really, really useful. That's me channeling Cialdini the best I could. So we'll keep this fast. I'll give you a little bit of background on myself to build authority, as people say that you should be doing as a presenter, and we'll take it from there. The goal of this particular session, in my mind, is to help you kind of increase traffic and leads to your website, which I've got a fair amount of experience with, despite the fact that I'm not really a marketer. I'm an engineer, a technology guy. So really quick background on me. Went to grad school at MIT, and while I was there, and this is relevant, I started a blog called On Startups, a niche market blog for entrepreneurs in my second year of grad school as part of some thesis work that I was doing, which the thesis was called On Startups. It was about analyzing software companies and how they make money and those kinds of things. And a lot of what I learned about internet marketing came as a result of this blog, which you guys probably have not. How many people have ever heard of On Startups in the room? Because yeah, no, all right, well that's all right. It's got a few claims to fame. One of which is it's the 4th largest LinkedIn group out of about 500,000 groups on LinkedIn, and we'll talk about how that came to be and the importance of starting early and things you should be doing right now that you'll regret not doing a year, 2 years from now. Brian Clark talked a little bit about this. You know, all the games are not over yet. There are still markets and there are still technologies. There are still things you should be getting into that will give you an advantage for starting early and starting now. I'm also an angel investor where I get a lot of feedback. These are all web startups, all consumer-y kind of things trying to grow traffic to hundreds of thousands and millions. So that's where some of my data comes from. As my day job, I'm the founder and CTO of a company called HubSpot. We're based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's a marketing software company. I'm not going to tell you anything about HubSpot, not much. Anyone heard of HubSpot? Used a bunch of you, that's great, okay. So HubSpot's doing really well, raised a bunch of funding. We've got about 110 employees now. Traffic and customers are growing really well. And I'm gonna put this slide up very briefly for one reason. One is to brag. This is the revenue growth or customer growth at HubSpot, not traffic, but actually dollars in the door, including through the downturn, which happened right in the middle there. It's hard to notice because the curve keeps going. But the main reason I want to put this up here is that a lot of what I'm about to share with you has the advantage of being true because it's based on data that we've collected across these 2,000 customers, across some of the free products that we have for grading websites and grading Twitter accounts and things like that. So as we go through this, by the way, if you have questions along the way, it's a small enough group, just raise your hand. You will not interrupt my chain of thought. There is really no chain of thought. It will be fine. I'll get back on track. Anyway, if you disagree, if that something just doesn't sound right to you, feel free to raise your hand, contest the point. In most of these cases, I happen to be right, but I like the debate anyway, because I've got lots of data to back it up, but it'll be fun. So here we go. I recently wrote a book called Inbound Marketing, doing surprisingly well. It's been the top 10 marketing book ever since it's been released. That talks about a lot of this stuff, and that's about as much self-promotional as I get. I don't sell stuff, so. All right, so let's talk about you. Raise your hand if you are getting way more traffic than you can actually handle, and you've got this massive budget that you just don't know what to do with, and you're just constantly, see, this is the kind of rhetorical question of the 2000, not rhetoric, as Brian Clark described from a historical perspective. So the reality is most of us need more traffic, and the things I'm going to talk about in this particular session are not paid traffic, which I have this kind of moral opposition to, but free traffic through various sources. Primarily, we don't have time for a lot, but we'll talk a little bit, teeny bit about SEO, so I can beat you over the head about some simple things. Talk about social media a fair amount, and blogging a fair amount in terms of how to drive traffic through those. One thing, Brian brought this up, which I think is very interesting, and we've started to notice this much more in the internet world. So there was a day, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, where if you were number 4, 5, 6, 9 in a given industry, you still made a fair amount of money. Life was okay. As the internet's come along, one thing we've seen happen is that we've seen this real compression where the #1 player in any given industry gets a majority of the spoils of that industry, to the sense that the #2 and #3 players are often not known. You don't even know them. You can't describe who Amazon's competitor is or Netflix's competitor is. Not only do they not have a whole lot of market share, most people don't even know who they are. So the moral of this particular story is, as you think about your businesses, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, it's imperative that you pick a niche that you can actually be #1 in. At least have a shot at being #1 in, because there's this steep drop-off in terms of how much market cap, how much value from that industry you're going to be able to capture if you're way further down the curve. As you build these businesses, think about that. Brian said this as well. I love this presentation, by the way. So I changed up my slides at the very last minute to kind of help extend those series of thoughts. So I think his ideas were dead on in terms of, yes, you should be thinking about content. Yes, you should be thinking about being an entrepreneur. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to kind of dig in and say, well, if you had to go home and do stuff to actually increase traffic, what would you do? So I want to kind of get into some of the nitty-gritty tactics and things we've learned. So one thing is, as you think about what industry you're in, the key is not to pick a fight with a ninja, unless you're a ninja. The idea here is, once again, this goes back to the need to be #1 or close to #1 or having a shot at it. The reality is, if you pick battles that you have no chance of winning, life is not going to be very fun. So the key in terms of industry, market, niche selection is you want a combination of picking an industry that's interesting enough in terms of big enough to support what you're trying to do, but small enough where the competition is weak enough where you actually have a chance of winning. Otherwise, life is just no fun. Don't pick a fight with a ninja. Don't get into something that's highly competitive unless you've got the skill set to actually take those people on. And my advice is kind of build that strength over time. And this applies even at a micro level to SEO things and keyword selection and things like that. And this, I'm a massive believer in, and we've seen examples, lots of speakers here. Even if you're in the affiliate marketing business, you should not think of yourself as an affiliate marketer. You should think, and Brian called this new media entrepreneur, which I kind of like. Whatever you choose to call it, think about the business. Think about how do you kind of take economics, how do you take the things that you learn at these kinds of conferences, and how do you apply them and build a sustainable, profitable, money-making business over the long term. And the affiliate marketing business, I think, there's lots of kind of short success stories, but you want to really invest in the long term. You want to build this engine that drives cash and profits over the long haul. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So this is something I talk about as an investor and as a startup guy a lot, because VCs will ask this question a lot, is the barrier to entry. It says, let's say you find some amazingly profitable niche, and you just kill it, you knock it out of the park. Economic theory would indicate that if that niche is that profitable, you will see competition. By definition, you will see competition. People will figure out, it's like, wow, he's making a ton of money over there. Why don't I get into that business? So as you're thinking about growing your profits, you need to have this other kind of parallel line of thinking around what am I doing in the business that's going to keep those competitors that are going to come at bay. How do you build a barrier to entry? And this is one of the things that I'll go on just a slight rant about. Well, I'll save it for later. It's plenty of rants in the presentation, so no need to consume them all right now. One thing we've learned, and this has been, and you guys know this right now, is that the kind of outbound marketing, push your message out, interruption marketing, whatever you call it, doesn't work. Doesn't work in the sense that you can't get traffic that way. It doesn't work in the terms of it's not an efficient way to produce traffic and leads. It just isn't. And the reason is very, very obvious, is that as a society, we walk around with these little bubbles around us that protect us from these outbound marketing messages. Raise your hand if you actually answer your phone without looking at caller ID, just hoping for that random telemarketing call that you were just sitting there waiting around. It's like, boy, am I glad that person called because I wanted to buy X. It doesn't happen. We don't open our emails anymore. We don't open our junk mail. And the kind of corollary to that is because that stuff doesn't work, it becomes increasingly expensive. You have to pay more and more money to break through those bubbles. That's obvious. So the challenge is, instead of trying to push this message out, instead of using all this cash trying to break through those bubbles, how do you actually use the web and pull people in? And that's what we're going to spend the entire session talking about, is drawing traffic in, drawing visitors, and making money. This is where I'll go off on my slight rant, is that how many people are buying AdWords right now, or some sort of PPC campaign? Okay, that's all right. Thanks for admitting it. I'm here to tell you that from a long-term business perspective, you cannot and should not rely on paid traffic. And here's why. So let's say you are really, really good at PPC. You're analyzing all the data. You know exactly what the cost per click is that you can afford to pay because you track your funnel all the way through. You know your revenue per click and per lead. And you figured out that you can pay $4.23 for that click. Up to $4.23. And you're getting them for $2.90, whatever the number happens to be. And that's great. Life is good. You're making money. You're converting those clicks into dollars. And you're profitable at it. The issue with this is that it's not sustainable. And here's why, is that, let's say someone gets into your market, let's say funded startup or something like that, comes along, and not overnight, immediately can drive up the bid prices for that. You don't see them coming, there is no warning, and this is the part that really kills me. They don't have to be good. They just have to have money. So the issue with PPC is that you can become a victim of the stupidest market entrant without knowing it. So my advice here is that it's great while you're making money to put money into PPC. My advice is to get good at the other stuff. Get good at organic, get good at social media, because that stuff, number one, I think the ROI is higher in the long term, but it's much more sustainable. You can protect that. If you have great rankings for relatively competitive keywords that are driving, you are not going to see someone overnight take that position away from you. It's unlikely, much less likely than the PPC world. And it's definitely not going to be someone that's 100 times stupider, because they can't easily buy their way into that. It just takes time. So organic stuff is much better. End of that particular rant. Anyone disagree? It's like that's the future, we want to continue? Okay, I'm going to try and not make my questions as rhetorical, just so I can drive a little bit more discussion. All right. So the idea here is spend money on creativity. We'll talk about experiments you can run, things you should do, and not cash. Your marketing should not be based on your budget. It should be based on how smart you are, what kind of creative ideas you can run through. And this one actually, I added to the presentation. I wasn't going to talk about this, but Marcus from Plenty of Fish actually talked about this very, very briefly in a panel around brand and naming. And his tip, by the way, in case you didn't make it to the particular session, he said if you are buying ads, in this particular sense, it was Facebook, you should put your domain name in your ad. Right? And the idea is that even if they don't click, it's leaving that impression, and you're building brand awareness. And that was one of the, I think, really, really, really smart thing. And one of the things I want to tell you about kind of just branding or naming more specifically, not branding, is that it does make a difference. So one of the things that people say, oh yeah, well, for every rule around naming a company or naming a website or whatever, there are 1,000 counterexamples of people that made bazillion dollars despite violating that rule. That's true. What I'm here to tell you is that despite, when all things are equal, they're really not. You can get small advantages by thinking about things up front, and especially around things like naming a domain or naming a website, because that's the kind of thing that's relatively hard to change without some type of inefficiency or kind of SEO value or things that are lost. So if you're getting into new projects, as you're launching things, I would advise you to think about the domain, think about the name of your website, and you have one primary decision to make. One is, do you build a synthetic name? It's completely fabricated, that no one's ever used, or close to no one, which is great. I'm a big fan of that. Or do you do a keyword-rich domain or some combination thereof? My advice now on naming, one tip I'll share with you because I can talk for an hour just on naming alone, is that you need to start thinking about, it was always important in my mind to have a relatively short name. All things being equal, shorter names outperform longer names. They just do. It's actually exaggerated now in the world of SEO and Twitter, and here's why. So in Twitter land, in an ideal world, your Twitter handle for your business should be identical to what your company name is. Don't play clever games with your Twitter handle if you've got a business account. Well, if you use up 14 characters in your Twitter handle, there is no URL shortener for your handle. So you're consuming characters, and that's that many fewer characters you can use to kind of spread the message or spread the tweet or doing whatever you do. So that having a 7-character, 8-character name saves you a fair amount of money in the long run in terms of not having to deal with trying to shorten things and squeeze stuff in. So and that's always been true. The other one, I'll share a really quick tip on branding, and this has been relatively widely circulated as well, is having earlier names in the alphabet are better. So names that start with an earlier letter. And the reason given before is like when you show up in a list or something like that, you're sooner in the list because lots of things get sorted alphabetically by definition. In SEO land, it's actually kind of weird twist to that particular tip, is that you want an earlier letter because in the event you do show up on a list, if you're past page 1, essentially, and you get dropped off into page 2 or 3 of that list, whatever it is, a majority of the SEO inbound link value that you would have gotten from that link in that directory, you lose. So just getting on that first page of whatever, it's like, oh, here's a list of the top 100 websites in the legal services market, and you happen to be, and it's sorted alphabetically, not in the order of what it's like, you're lost. You're on page 2, page 3, lots of value lost. Anyway, short little tactical tip thing. But anyway, all right. There was a fair amount of talk. There were SEO clinics here. I hope you guys went to them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. One thing I do want to tell you, though, is that because I see entrepreneurs and new businesses make this mistake all the time, is not starting early enough with your SEO efforts in terms of, A, getting a domain out there, which sounds kind of obvious because there is a time clock to Google. Older sites do perform better over the long term. So you need to be investing in SEO literally from the day you have your idea for whatever project it is. Come up with a name, get a website out there, get some linking and get it into the index and start growing it and start kind of just planting those seeds. We're not going to have a lot of time to spend on this, but one of the things I've done at HubSpot, which has been very popular for us in terms of making us a bunch of money, is a tool called Website Grader. Anyone used Website Grader before? Okay, several of you. It's a free tool to kind of look at the very, very basic kind of SEO and traffic and social media related to a website. It's at grader.com. There's a link off of it. You can play around with it. Some of the stuff that I might have shared with you comes from data out of Website Grader, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on SEO since you guys have spent time. One is obviously get the basics right in terms of page titles and your description and things like that. This one's more important. I haven't seen this talked about a lot from an SEO perspective, is we kind of tend to get really caught up in the technical details of SEO around, oh, I want to structure this just right and move my JavaScript and CSS to separate files and drive, and that's all true. You should get those fundamentals right. But the reality from SEO is most of SEO, like 95+% of it, is really about making users happy. So if you're trying to figure out how Google would behave in a certain situation, like, oh, should I do this versus that? Do I get this? Google is solving, they have billions and billions and billions of dollars at stake to make their users happy. So the answer to the question, should I do this or that, and what will work better from an SEO perspective is always, always, will it make Google's users happy? If it does, it will work over the long term. If it doesn't, I can argue it probably doesn't work today even though you think it does, and in long term it's not going to work. They've got way too much money, they're way too smart, it's going to get phased out over time. So spend a lot of time on kind of just design and solving for that user experience. All right. Now I'm going to make eye contact and do things that professional speakers do. How are things going so far? Is this, okay? By the way, I would talk slower, but I have only one other speed, and it's even faster. So this is as slow as I get. Yes, question?
Can I ask you a question about Twitter?
Sure.
I don't think this is working. But you gave some advice on Twitter where you said make sure and get your business name reserved.
Yep.
I actually recommend the opposite.
Okay.
Always be yourself on Twitter and link to your business.
Yep.
Which is what you do.
Yes.
And you are yourself.
Yep.
Your name, your face, and then you link back to your business.
This is actually a great point. So, I actually do both. So I have my personal Twitter handle, which is at Dharmesh, and then HubSpot, my company, has its own Twitter account. And so there's the trade-off here is that if you're just getting started, I strongly advise being yourself on Twitter, using your name as your Twitter handle, and that's very, very true. The one downside to that over the long term, so if you think about your business, one of the mistakes entrepreneurs make, hello? Yeah? It's on, okay, here we go. One of the mistake entrepreneurs make is they attach themselves too closely to their business. And so here's the question you should ask yourself. If you start the business today, and 5 years from now, you decide to exit and go into something different. You want to just take money off the table, you want to cash out for whatever reason, to the degree that your personal identity and your name is attached to the business, the overall expected value of that business goes down unless you are attached to it. So it's going to be harder for you to leave. So you need to kind of balance a trade-off of how closely, yes, you want to be yourself on social media, but I advocate in terms of if you're really building out a business social account, you're better off if you're going to have a team. If you're going to be solo, then that's fine if you don't envision kind of a cash out someday. But that's a trade-off, but it's a very good point in terms of if you're getting started, do a personal account. So let's talk about blogging. How many people have a blog today for their business? Okay, about 3/4 of the room, give or take. So I've actually started 2 blogs, both of which have done pretty well. So the On Startups blog, 20,000+ subscribers, lots of traffic and accolades and things. The HubSpot blog is a top 25 marketing blog on Ad Age. And one of the things that we've learned from both of those blogging experiences, especially if you're starting out, is if the traffic on your blog sucks, the most common reason is that you're selling too hard, too early. And I am a red-blooded capitalist by all definitions of the term, well, all nice definitions of the term from a microeconomics perspective. So I'm not opposed to making money. But I'm going to tell you that if you sell too hard too soon on your blog, it's self-defeating. So what you want to do is in the early days of a blog, and we took this to the extreme with HubSpot. When we started the blog, number one, we didn't brand it with the company name. It was on a separate domain. It was called Small Business Hub at the time that we started it. And we grew traffic, and we did not talk about the product, did not talk about the offering. All we talked about was the industry and its problems and our thoughts and our ideas around that. And as it turns out, even when you do that, even when you're trying to kind of display this thought leadership and you're talking about industry issues and you've got great, brilliant, should be winning Nobel Prizes content, it's still really hard to build blog traffic. It is impossible to build any kind of decent blog traffic if you hit your early readers over the head with sales and marketing pitches. We just, as a society, we don't have the patience for that anymore. There's too much great content out there. You haven't built that trust and credibility. So what we did at HubSpot is that we kind of built the blog up to a certain kind of readership level and audience. Once we have the credibility, then we changed the name. So now it's blog.hubspot.com, so we can actually kind of promote the brand, and it's working pretty well for us. So when you actually make that switch can be kind of argued. Personally, I actually argued at HubSpot to continue what we were doing and not even rebrand it because the traffic was growing great, but I'm not the sales and marketing guy. So any opposition to that in terms of not selling, not marketing on the blog? Okay. All right. The other thing that we've learned on the blogging front is that you should try different forms of content. And one of the things that's been really weird, and I'll put an example up there, and it may be a little bit hard for you guys to read. So one of the things we tried, this was last year, is a cartoon. So we've been writing really kind of how-to articles about inbound marketing and how to drive traffic and leads and things like that. It was going well. And so then I had the bright idea, it's like, oh, well, how about we do something funny for a change? Let's try a cartoon. So this was the very first one. And I'll read off to you. It says, oh, I'm a marketer. And the second one is I blog about marketing. Third one is I have a podcast about marketing bloggers. I tweet about podcasters that talk about marketing bloggers. And the final one, I have a Facebook group for Twitter users that tweet about podcasters that talk about marketing bloggers. This was a phenomenal success as a piece of content in terms of raw dollars in the door. It cost us $125 to produce that cartoon, and it was the first one. So then we're like, oh, well, that's a fluke. Clearly, the industry is way too smart. This is inane. It's not that useful. Yeah, we made people smile. And yeah, some of them signed up. And yes, we made money off of it in the whole grand scheme, but we're not going to be able to repeat it. We did. In terms of forms of content, this is actually the highest performing format of everything we've done on the blog. It just so turns out. And it may be different for your industry. So we've tried music videos. We've tried poems. We've tried every imaginable way to take our message or variations of our message and kind of put it out there. So my advice to you here would be experiment with different types of things. Don't assume that you know your customers, you know your audience, you know your readers. Try it. Try lots of cheap experiments because what you want is okay, this is minor rant again. Too many internet marketers kind of crank through day after day and their blog traffic grows by 50 users, 100 users a day, a week, or whatever, and you're just slogging it out. And life is no fun. What I'm suggesting to you is that every week, every month, every something, you need to try something radically new and different that has what I call a non-linear jump in your traffic. 9 out of 10 times, it's going to flop. It's supposed to. If it doesn't flop 9 out of 10 times, you're not trying enough things. So the idea here is that if I trace back both for the On Startups blog and the HubSpot blog, I can trace back most of our success to these independent, like, wow, we jumped, and then I hit a new floor. We jumped and hit a new floor. So what you want to be doing is constantly trying these new things to see what works. If you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're going to get very linear results. You'll have steady growth, but it's just no fun. So try something new, experiment with new forms of content. Okay, we're doing on time, doing good. The other thing is, and I'm surprised we haven't talked more about this at the Affiliate Marketing Summit because you guys are very geeky, data-y types, is analytics. I think I'll propose to the organizers, we should have like sessions and sessions on just raw analytics. How do you take your marketing data and put it under a microscope and really figure out what's working? So I want to share one anecdote with you in terms of, since we're on the blogging topic, because this is, it doesn't get talked about a lot. So we talk about return on content. Like, let's you write a blog article, and it's really hard to justify because you know what? Oh, we've only got like 200 RSS readers. We get this many. It's like, oh my God, it's just so painful. It takes so much time. Why would I do that? Because I'm only getting this many visitors and 0.1 leads for every blog article produced or something like that. It's something microscopic. And that's true. In the early days of a blog, it's very, very hard to just tangibly say, oh, this was worth it. But the issue is that we're not measuring the actual value created from that piece of content, from that blog article. So in addition to the visitors that you get immediately, and over time, which you don't measure, but you should, and HubSpot's done a bunch of, I'll email me or tweet me, I'll send you guys a report that we did internally in terms of trying to figure out the return on a blog article. I would have included it here, but not enough time. Anyway, what we learned was that on average, a blog article makes us so much over its lifetime. Because on average, certain articles will continue to produce traffic long after they were written. So it's not that first week where we see some small boost in traffic. For months and years after that, it delivers. That's value one that doesn't get measured. It's like, oh, this week it didn't really do all that well, but you're going to get traffic for eternity for reasonably well done articles. Number two is the SEO value, which doesn't happen in that first few days or weeks. So let's say you write an article and only gets 10 visitors and 0 leads. But someone links to that article because it resonates with someone out there. That link has value and will pay off in terms of future traffic, once again, for eternity. So when you're thinking about the ROI, when you're putting your kind of marketing data under a microscope, you need to think about the actual value created for your marketing efforts. And it is measurable. It just doesn't show up in the short term. Some things take a little bit longer. What you need to do is get into the habit of measuring this stuff over a long period of time, because then you can get a sense 6 months, 9 months, 12 months down the road, you'll say, oh, our average article gets this many visitors 3 months out. And here's what that means. And here's the actual lead flow, and here's the dollars in the door as a result of that effort. So it's the measuring success thing. We've talked about making things hot. Other things that work in terms of blog content, and what kind of experiments do you run? One is polarization. And I don't mean this in a kind of sensationalist sense. But what I will say is that if you're in the marketing business, death is in the middle. Death is when 50% of the people, well, you're like, okay, well, this is what I believe or whatever, because the average website, the average business, the average startup, the average everything dies. You can't be average and win, not in this game. So what you need to do is to polarize. You need to take a stand. And I'm going to posit to you that for every person that violently and energetically disagrees with whatever position you've taken, you will find a fanatical person to agree. And that those fanatical people that agree are worth much more to you than having a bunch of people in the middle that will do nothing, even though they think you're okay. So the idea here is that you need to really take a stand. So in HubSpot's case, we talk about this kind of inbound versus outbound marketing. It's like, oh, outbound marketing, which is direct marketing and telemarketing and all that kind of stuff. You know, we go on record and we say, oh, we think outbound marketing sucks. We think outbound marketing harms kittens. It's just bad. Do we do outbound marketing ourselves? Hell yes, we do. But the reality is if we took that kind of soft, it's like, oh yeah, well, you know, you need a marketing mix and here's how you do it or whatever. It doesn't get people energized, doesn't attract attention. So I would advise you, whatever you're writing about, whatever your business happens to be, you need to be passionate about the position that you take, but take a position. Don't be scared of pissing a few people off. You should be pissing a few people off. I've pissed lots of people off on the way. All right, let's talk about social media. In terms of writing content that has a chance, we'll call it a 5%, 10% chance of going big, going viral, doing something. In order to do that, you have to now, it was much easier years ago, but now you almost have to consciously and deliberately try for it to go big. Accidents do happen, but they're rare, like getting on the front page of Dig or something like that and having it really go viral and then you get tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of visitors. Every now and then it happens, but very rarely does it happen without some conscious design. So what I'm going to suggest to you here is that as you're thinking about, this has been talked about a little bit in Chris Knight's session as well, is you need to think about the title. Obviously, title is hugely important. But think about title from a kind of click-through perspective, from a will people share this perspective, will people vote it up perspective. Ask 10 people. Before you even write the article, write the potential titles, ask friends and family and say, is this something you would share? Is this something you would click on? Is this something you would vote up? Ask your kids, ask your nieces and nephews. It's okay. The reality is the overall probability of you predicting the outcome of an article goes up dramatically if you ask someone that's not in your immediate vicinity, not in your business. And just ask normal people. It's like, what do you think? Even if they're not in your industry. And your title should have that kind of appeal. It should be designed for the upvote. Not in all cases, but every now and then you need to be shooting for that. You need to be shooting for an article that's going to go big and have that nonlinear jump in traffic. And let's talk about just some of the tactics around this. And this is interesting. In order to increase the probability that someone, so let's assume you write this great piece of content, it's a great blog article, it's designed for the upvote, it's just brilliant, it should be winning awards. Even then, it helps to make it as easy to share that piece of content as humanly possible. And I'm not talking just about what you need to do. Have buttons to say, oh, share this on Dig or StumbleUpon or Twitter or Facebook or whatever. That's all great. You need to go the one added step, and I'll give you an example here. This is an experiment I just ran. Bring the website up. All right, so this is on my startup blog. So I wrote an article called Startup Advice in Exactly 3 Words. And I put the hashtag in the article title. Interesting, just a couple little tactical notes on things that worked. And I've not shared this with anybody yet, except for people in the company. The average article on my blog usually gets about 50 retweets. This one got 1,300 retweets, 50,000 page views. And let me tell you why. So it goes down, and it has a bunch of these little very pithy, exactly 3-word pieces of simple startup advice. Next to each one of those statements is a tweet link that says, oh, did you like that particular phrase? Tweet it. Not at the top of the article, not the article itself. Did you like this individual piece of micro content within the article? So imagine if you have something that was quotable in your blog article. It's like, oh, this is something I want people to share. Not the article title, that would be great if they did that, but when you have this, like, wow, that's brilliant, that's what I want to share with people, that's the piece that I want to send to my friends and send to my community. It's not that hard to, instead of just making, it's almost as easy as creating a hyperlink, right? It's like you create a hyperlink to Twitter, and it will autofill the tweet and your hashtag and your backlink to the article. It can do all that automatically. This works. The reason it works is because it's blindingly simple for people to share once they decide they want to share. One additional tactical note on making things easy to share. Let's flip back to the presentation here. By the way, for the presenters that are in the room, Shift F5 continues the presentation from wherever you are without having to find the menus and things like that. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, so the other thing to make things really simple to share. So we'll come back to this when we talk about StumbleUpon. How many people use Dig? Or try to? How many people have had an article go to the front page of Dig ever? In the last 6 months, let's say, 3 months? All right. Don't do that. Don't try to get onto the front page of Dig. It is almost impossible. And that's not the reason not to try. That would be okay for it to be almost impossible. And Dig is a social news website. For those that don't know, it's like people kind of share content and vote it up, and it gets to the front page. And if you make the front page of Dig, you will get in the order of, let's say, between 20,000 and 200,000 page views or hits or something like that. The issue with Dig, and the reason I'm going to tell you not to spend time, which is good because not a lot of you are spending time yet, is that it's very binary. If you make the front page of Dig, you get tens of thousands of visitors. If you don't make the front page of Dig, you get almost nothing. It's very binary. It's like buying a lottery ticket that you're not going to win. And the odds say you're not going to win. Instead, if you're going to spend time trying to get traffic, I highly, highly recommend taking a look at StumbleUpon. So StumbleUpon is a social discovery site, similar in concept, where people essentially vote up things that they like and don't like, and then you can hit the StumbleUpon button for the users, and it sends them to random sites that the system thinks they'll like. From HubSpot's perspective, on the On Startups blog, I won't say hundreds, but tens of sites that I've looked at, stumble upon, is in the top 5 list of traffic sources when done right and focused on. So spend some time, it's worth it. And the nice thing about StumbleUpon is that even if you have somewhat mediocre-ish content, not great, well, I don't call it mediocre, it's good but not great, you will still see some traffic. You'll see tens, hundreds of visitors if, let's say, 5 or 10 people upvote that piece of content. And the other value that StumbleUpon has versus Dig is that there are many more categories and likely one that's awfully close to the industry or niche that you're in. So go through the categories, start building up some community and some user interest, start learning about how it works, and start thinking about StumbleUpon. It will help you drive traffic. All right, Facebook, as you guys know and have been reading about, there are more users on Facebook than there are atoms in the known universe at this point. We just crossed that threshold last week. I'm kidding, obviously. But it's big. So one of the common things that comes back is when I talk to our customers, which are small businesses between, let's say, 20 and 200 employees, they're like, oh yeah, I'm in the real estate brokering business, I'm in the legal services for intellectual property. My customers are not on Facebook. Most of the time, they're wrong, like just flat out wrong. And if they're not wrong, they're about to be wrong. So the largest growing or fastest growing demographic on Facebook today is, and has been actually for months now, is women over the age of 55. Not number of users, but the fastest growing in terms of new users joining. It's very hard to resist the temptation. All of you got flooded with Facebook invites over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, and at some point, most humans just give up. Because as carbon-based life forms, we're like, okay, already, I will join. And that's happening, and that's why they have 350 million users now. All right, so let's talk about, for your business, you should have a fan page, not a group. That debate's been had. Don't do groups, do fan pages if you haven't done one yet. We won't talk a lot about that. Facebook search is interesting. So one of the reasons we got into SEO and Google and things like that was very, very simple. As marketers, we're like, oh, well, that's where the users are. That's where the customers are. There's billions of people searching on Google. I want some of that traffic, and so I'm going to optimize my website. I'm going to hire SEOs. I'm going to do all that stuff. But I'm here to tell you we're seeing similar things inside of Facebook. So the search engine on Facebook, the little search box that exists within Facebook.com is one of the top 10 search engines on the planet. Hundreds of millions of searches inside that little search box. And then you're going to argue and say, oh, well, that's true, Dharmesh, but those are people searching for their old college boyfriends and girlfriends. They're not really buying stuff, and you're probably right. They're not searching in the same way that they're searching Google. The intent to purchase is not there, so the quality of the searches is not there from a marketing perspective. But one thing I would posit to you is that Facebook has a very different set of data than Google has. They have information about the social graph. They know who your friends are. They know who you're communicating with. And think about the social graph in the same way we think about the kind of overall web graph that Google has access to in terms of all these inbound links. Well, for certain kinds of searches, I will posit to you that Facebook actually has better data than Google has. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're looking for a landscape designer in Boston. Sure, you can go to Google and you can type in landscape designer in Boston, and what you will get are the best websites that are about landscape design in Boston. That's what you're going to get. If you search Facebook, you're going to get people that are close to you. It's like, oh, this is a friend of a friend that happens to be in the Boston area that has the word landscape design somewhere in their bio or profile. What I'm going to suggest to you is that there are certain kinds of searches that are better on Facebook than Google. The quality of the results are better. And what I will tell you is that people are going to figure that out. Just like Google wasn't around forever. All of a sudden, Google came along, people started searching like, oh, wow, this is way better than AltaVista and Yahoo. And they moved because the switching costs were so low. Same thing is going to happen on Facebook. The first kinds of searches we're seeing now are people-based services, lawyers, real estate brokers, people-based services because it's about people. That's the actual service offering, but it'll start to gravitate. All right, moving right along. If you haven't played around with Facebook advertising yet, you should. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't. But even if you don't, you should start because there's this nifty little tool inside of Facebook ads. And here's what this does. Basically, you type in the profile of the user you want to target. You don't actually have to buy an ad. This tool is available before you even actually pull out a credit card. So like, oh, I want people in the United States that are in this age group, that are in the engaged status. Not married, not divorced, but engaged. And it comes back with a user account. a user count of how many people on Facebook fit that profile. It's the most accurate, cheapest form of market research I've ever seen. I'm not sure how long it'll be around, but you should definitely play with this. It's lots and lots of fun in terms of you're trying to figure out where markets are and what you should be focused on. Twitter, we should spend a little bit of time on because even normal people use Twitter now. It's a result of the elections, result of movies, result of CNN. Normal people, you hear it around the radio, you see it on TV. It's not about people that read TechCrunch. It's not the geeks anymore. It's normal people. And trust me on this one, it's been said before, and it was true. Building authority on Twitter will also help you, not just driving Twitter traffic, which we're about to talk about. It will help you in the long term around SEO as well. Google's already starting to show evidence that they're looking at followers and overall kind of Twitter profiles coming in. They're trying to index that content. They've got a partnership. We won't talk about a lot about that. Let's talk about Twitter itself. So one of the things, I'm very passionate about Twitter, and I'm a data geek. So I built a tool called Twitter Grader. And the idea behind Twitter Grader, it's like PageRank for websites or web pages, is it ranks a Twitter user, gives them a grade. It's like, oh, here's how well you're doing on Twitter, and basically measures the power and authority of an individual Twitter user. Brian Clark, by the way, happens to be in the top 100, as is Guy Kawasaki and folks like that, and looks at a bunch of stuff. That is not just a free tool, by the way, it's fun to try out. But the stuff I'm about to show you is a result of us having close to 6 million accounts worth of data, about 55 million connections, hundreds of millions of tweets. Informs the stuff I'm about to show you. The basics. If you're in Twitter at all, please don't make these mistakes. Like, fill out your profile. If you're in it for the business, if you're doing it for marketing, if you're trying to get traction, if you're trying to drive something to your blog, do the basics. At least do the basics. So the numbers, it's like, here's how many people fail to do just that. It's like a one-time cost. It takes 5 minutes. So do that stuff, please. There's Ryan's. He's number 71. So the nice thing about Twitter. Oh, sure. Sorry. Yep.
One more.
Oops. Sorry.
Are you going to have this slide available?
Yeah, I'll share it with the organizers, and they'll spread it through whatever means that they do those kinds of things. People don't. Yeah, my slides are very sparse, except this one. That's true.
A few others.
All right. Cool.
Need a few screen caps.
So I have very few words. All right. So this is Brian. He's doing well. What Twitter Grader looks at, which is obviously the things I believe are important, is not just getting followers. It's about being retweeted, about who those followers are, to what degree do you engage the community, because it's the kind of stuff that if you were, let's say, Google, looking at an individual Twitter account, how do you measure authority and power? And it's not just about followers any more than Google, SEO was about getting 100,000 links. Well, it's like, what kinds of links? Who are they from? Are they reciprocal? Those kinds of things. So all the things that, they'll work temporarily in terms of, they won't work with Twitter Grader in terms of just driving, followers will work a little bit, but not very much. But the reality is what's important is to what degree can you truly get endorsement from the Twitter community? And one of the ways you do that is you get retweeted. So you tweet something. It's like, oh, I saw Dharmesh and he said this and I thought that was useful. Which I encourage you to do, by the way. If you get retweeted, that helps. Forget Twitter Grader. That helps because that builds your audience. It builds real followers because whoever retweeted you, for the most part, obviously you can still write bots and things like that to do that, but whoever retweeted you did it for a reason, and that there's a real carbon-based life form at the other end in most cases. So you want to share content that gets retweeted. That's important. I'm going to show you two really quick pieces of data. So we looked at over 100 million tweets, let's call it, and this surprised us. It's one of the reasons we have 30-slide deck that talks just about retweeting, by the way. That's how geeky we are. One of the things we learned is that if you look at all the tweets that got retweeted, and all the ones that didn't, that was the kind of sample, what we learned is that tweets that had longer words got retweeted more often. I would have bet money against that particular outcome. It's like, oh yeah, but people are simple and they like easy words with monosyllabic. It's funny that monosyllabics, it's got multiple syllables, but anyway, I digress. So it's funny, but I have data, mounds and mounds of data to support this. So just little things. If you ask for a retweet, you are much more likely to get it. You shouldn't use it judiciously, but the reality is this works. So for instance, if you say, hey, I just posted this article, or I'm doing this, whatever, please retweet. Do a please space RT at the end of it. you are much more likely for that to get retweeted. It works. So when you write that brilliant blog article, and you've been you've been working on it for weeks or whatever, it's your 12th one, but this one you really, really think is good, when you want to drive traffic, and you have a Twitter following, which I encourage you to build, you can ask for help from your community if you've earned that trust. Just use it sparingly, use it judiciously, essentially. But it works, that's all I'm here to tell you. Time of day, very interesting. Graph speaks for itself, but basically around noonish, tweets that get posted around then get retweeted much more often. This one wasn't that big of a surprise to us. It's like, okay, well, people on both coasts are awake, essentially. Some on their lunch hour. What's that? Yeah. So there's that. All right. And no discussion on social media should be complete without a discussion of LinkedIn, which I think is being the kind of redheaded stepchild of social media. Everybody wants to talk about Twitter, and everybody wants to talk about Facebook, and no one talks about LinkedIn, which is a shame, because these people have jobs. They have money to spend. They're customers or potential customers. So you should be looking at LinkedIn. A couple of tactical notes on LinkedIn. You may not know it, but LinkedIn has the equivalent of status updates. You can say, here's what I'm doing now. Those status updates support links. So you can link to stuff. Hopefully your LinkedIn network is relatively relevant. Yes, you might have some friends, but you should, every now and then you should share with the community. It's like, oh yeah, I'm launching this new thing, or I wrote this new book, or I'm going to speak, whatever it happens to be, you should be posting. The other thing that's interesting for you RSS users out there, which should be all of you, you can actually get an RSS feed of your community's network updates, so you can find out what other people are doing. So there's a little RSS icon on the little network updates thing. I encourage you, so you can kind of keep track of, oh, so-and-so just changed jobs, they did this or did that, kind of build those conversations, because those conversations are often have a much higher signal-to-noise ratio than conversations on Twitter. So it's much easier to follow what's happening on your LinkedIn account and within that community than you can on Twitter. So much less spammy. Good. LinkedIn groups. It's a little bit late, but not too late for lots of industries now. There's about 500,000 groups, but that's not enough. So what I would advise, if you're in an industry trying to build some thought leadership or whatever, find the closest groups. There is a search feature. If you go to LinkedIn, right, upper right, instead of searching for people, you can pull this little drop down and search for groups. Find groups that are close. If those groups have less than, let's call it, 1,000 members, you can take them. If they have not invested enough in their LinkedIn group to get the membership beyond, let's say, 1,000-ish users, that game is not yet over. You have the capacity to win that particular race. So I encourage you to go look and see if someone's really claimed that spot. On startups, my startup blog, with very little effort, just timing, has 122,000 members now. The nice thing about LinkedIn groups, I don't like the discussion forums. There's lots of stuff I hate about groups. What I love about LinkedIn groups, in terms of value for marketers, is that I have the opportunity to message those community members. So those 122,000 people I can send a message to once a week. There's a limit, which I don't abuse. What's neat about it is that that message goes out to LinkedIn through the linkedin.com domain to the primary address of the user. The reason that's important is it's got the highest email click-through and conversion rate of any email marketing thing I have ever seen. Very, very high, for a very simple reason. Those are real email addresses. When people change jobs, they change their LinkedIn email address. And it's coming from their domain. They have higher deliverability than probably most of us in this room in terms of getting their messages through. All right, almost there. Wow, I'm doing great. From a timing perspective, I don't know about the content, but how are we doing now? I'll take a quick break. Any questions so far? So far, so good? All right, cool. Moving right along. And I have not passed out yet, so by all definition, my definition, this is a success. Let's talk about free. This came up at one of the roundtables I was sitting in on around, well, the context in which the question was asked is, okay, I have this white paper, I think it was an ebook, should I have a registration form or something in front of it, or should I just kind of give it away without any kind of information asked? I don't know the answer to that. I have an opinion, but I don't know the answer. My opinion is that free works really, really well. Chris Anderson, the same guy that wrote The Long Tail, wrote a book on this topic. And the kind of core of it really is that there's a very, very big difference, and he's got lots of data to support this, and the Wired article actually was really good, it's worth reading. But basically the difference between charging a penny and having something free, even though it's only a penny, is multiple orders of magnitude. It's huge, right? And that's obvious, like, oh yeah, well, it's not the penny, it's the inconvenience. So it's not that you're asking for an email address or for them to fill out a form in order for them to get your white paper, it's the inconvenience. Now, if the paper is highly authoritative, you've got strong brand, and you can ask for it, by all means, go ahead and do it. If not, you are probably better off taking down the wall in front of that content, at least for some of your content, and making it truly free. And have the calls to action in that piece of content, in the ebook, in the white paper, whatever it is, and draw people back in. And this goes to the kind of whole concept of reciprocity. It's like if you haven't given them anything yet, if they're new, it's kind of hard to ask for information. If you do ask for stuff, please, please, please don't have this like 14-question long form. That's a rant for another day. But speaking of forms, one little tip I'll share with you, because around landing page forms, so we all know that the more questions you ask, the lower the overall completion rate, relatively obvious. Not quite as obvious, at least it wasn't to me, was degree to which a question is subjective and requires even a microsecond of thought drives the completion rate. And let me give you an example. So we had a question on one of our pages on HubSpot, which got tens of thousands of visitors, that asked what we thought was a simple question. How many employees in your company? And we had really good reasons for asking the questions. Like, we want to know because we have different products, and wouldn't it be nice to know how many employees you have in your company? As it turns out, that's a hard question for lots of people. Hard enough. It's like, well, are you talking about full-time or part-time or freelancers or contractors or W-2s or whatever? And I'm moving on to the next website. So if you're going to ask a question which I would classify as being definitive. There is no ambiguity. A website address, an email address, there is no ambiguity. It's like, oh, I know what that is. I type it in, I do it all the time or whatever. If you cause the brain to pause for a second, the impatient ones leave. It's not worth it. So in most cases, the questions that you're asking, you shouldn't ask those on the very, very front page. Live to fight another day. And this has nothing to do with free, but how many people use Bitly for URL shortening on Twitter or whatever? Quick little tactical tip that not that many people know of is if you take a Bitly link out of Twitter, so let's say you find someone's article, and we have a whole other session we could talk about competitive stalking and things like that, but so let's say you find someone that you respect. It's like, wow, they're in my industry, they wrote this article, and it's great. Take that Bitly URL from their tweet, or anyone's tweet, put it into the browser, don't hit enter yet, and put a plus sign after it, and then hit enter. What it will do for all Bitly links, not some, all Bitly links, it will give you a deep analysis, how many clicks it got, where those clicks came from, and time of day.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Sure. So if you take the URL, the Bitly kind of link, paste it into the browser, and put a plus sign right after the URL. So it's kind of hard to read, but it's in there, like at the very, very end.
Okay.
So basically it modifies the URL, so you put a plus sign after, and then it'll give you this, essentially, this analytics data about that link. How many people clicked it, what time it was, where they came from, and all that stuff. And the reason this is interesting is that if you want to see a successful article, it's like, okay, well, yeah, this person wrote a great article on X topic. Did it get 100,000 clicks, or 10,000 clicks, or 1,000 clicks? It'd be useful sometimes data to have in terms of what's working and what's not. All right. Not a lot of time to talk about this, but I want to plant the seed in your heads anyway, because it's the right thing to do. As you're thinking about marketing, you need to think about, most of you are not going to be solo over time. You're not going to be solo. And there are certain kinds of people that you want to start kind of pulling in. One, this is a biased opinion, but it's still true, is some sort of engineering web development talent. That investment is going to pay off much better than pay-per-click over the long term or things like have someone that can actually build apps for you, build tools, build something that's interactive, because that, at least from HubSpot's perspective, we've seen this for customers as well. So Website Grader, by the way, our free tool, today, 3 years later, millions of dollars later, it is the single largest lead gen source at HubSpot. Has been from the day we launched it. Didn't know. It took me 3 days to write the thing. It's the least invested in product at HubSpot as well. It's just a money-making machine. So what I'm going to advise you is think about interactive tools, because the competition is much lower there. Lots of people can crank out blog content. Some people can make videos. Some people can draw cartoons. Actually building interactive apps, even if they're simple, don't Don't underestimate the power of that. Even if it's stupid simple, in most industries, some sort of interactive tool that either captures data or something works. So think about that, and then think about hiring for reach. In terms of, let's say you're hiring a marketing intern or a marketing associate or something like that. Look them up on Twitter, look them up on LinkedIn and Facebook. A lot of those people, especially people that are younger or less experienced, have massive amounts of reach. And that is valuable to you in terms of getting some initial momentum going. If they just graduated out of marketing school or something like that, and it works. We've seen, and we hire 4 interns. Well, we hire lots of interns at HubSpot. We love them. But anyway, so think about that. Think about engineering talent, people that can actually produce interactive app-y type stuff, and think about people that really get to social media and have existing reach that can help you kind of get some initial momentum going. Now moving on to closing out with some squishy stuff. If you're not having fun, there's something very, very wrong. Very, very wrong. And I don't mean this in just a completely squishy sense. I mean this in the marketing is starting to become, in terms of recruiting that talent, getting those star performers, those stars to be, it's the Brian Clarks, let's say 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Getting those kinds of people on board, you're essentially playing a passion arbitrage game. You can't afford, probably, to pay them 6-figure salaries, which they might be worth. You need to make it fun. Think about the ROI on that. Even if you just sit down and say, okay, well, I'd have to pay a recruiter this or whatever, if you can make the actual job fun, let them experiment, let them try things, let them... So one of the things I like to tell all of our employees is, like, when we hire, we want to increase and improve the resumes of every employee in the company. We want them to be worth more because they're likely to stay longer. It's counterintuitive, but it works. It's kind of entrepreneurial advice, but I'll close out. And my last slide on a squishy note is that I talked to thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs. All of you should be thinking about a startup someday, thinking about being new media entrepreneurs or whatever, and you all have some sort of super talent. You just do. One of them might be convincing others, seeing talent in others, whatever it might be, and you owe it to yourself to take that leap, to actually do something meaningful, whatever. Yes, you can crank out and it's like, oh, I'm going to push out content, I'm going to draw traffic and leads and make the salespeople happy, but you should go big. That's all I've got. Thanks for your time. Questions? We have about 3-ish minutes. So we got people. I'll let you ask your question while they're on their way. Go ahead.
Can I talk louder?
Sure.
Okay. One, thank you for this and for what you do at HubSpot. It's extraordinarily valuable.
Thanks.
One question on the Twitter grader. One thing I've always been curious about, the percentages of your grade. I always get in the 99 percentile, but I'm like 40,000. What does that mean? Is that a marketing thing for you, or is it really?
No, it's not marketing. It's the. Okay, I'll give you the semi-short answer. So that percentile score is actually a statistical percentile score. So when you get let's say someone gets a 98% or 98 score, what that means is that their Twitter grade is higher than 98% of the other 5.8 million people in the database. Well, numerically, as it turns out, because there's so many people, there are going to be, by definition, 50,000 people-ish with over 99. And I get grief from users. Oh, I'm going to change that because although it makes sense to me as a geeky kind of numerical guy, it's like, well, that's kind of stupid. So it will change. I'm working on it. I got to get myself off the road and actually write code. But yes.
I love your podcast, and Karen and Mike do an awesome job. What do you think about podcasting, and why hasn't it gained more acceptance? And how's podcasting for you guys?
Yeah. So for us. So we have a weekly TV show called HubSpot TV that we do. Essentially, it's a show about marketing. It's done live in our offices with a live studio audience, and we record it, put it up on iTunes. It gets pretty good traffic, and it's really good from a karma perspective. What's even better in terms of video content is webinars. Webinars work. I actually had submitted, I think, a topic idea to talk about, for an hour about just webinars, which we could have done. So going back to your question, the reason I think video is harder, it doesn't get as much traction sometimes, number one, it's harder to produce, so less people do it, right? It's the written form we've done for a while, video recording people are just not that comfortable with yet. That's number one. And number two, it's harder, certain types of content are much harder to do in video format because people can't scan. Like if you have a how-to article with 14 steps or whatever, people can like consume that article in 3 minutes flat and say, oh, well, these are steps that I didn't quite know about. I can jump in. It's hard to, so for certain kinds of content, so we like video content because it has much more emotional appeal, and it draws in a certain kind of audience. Webinars have been great for us. We get 5,000 plus attendees for an average webinar at HubSpot now, so that's great. I'm a big believer in video content overall, but that's the reason, is that it's just a different medium than the written form. Question in the back there?
So we're interested, obviously, in becoming more and more social, using all these tools, but what we're finding is we want to keep things small and concentrated as far as manpower is concerned. What tools are out there to help manage all this, to keep your sanity so you can still focus on the business and properly advertise?
Yeah, it's a good question. Since the market's so new, there's lots of, so there's different categories of tools now. So if, let's say for social media monitoring, like you want to monitor when your brand is mentioned on Twitter and Facebook and things like that, there are companies like Radian6, which is probably the most widely recognized one. If you're doing kind of workflowy type stuff within Twitter, it's like I want to delegate a tweet and have people respond. There's companies like CoTweet. There's a bunch of tools. We have a bunch of free content on HubSpot. If you tweet me, I can send you a link to it afterwards. But it's still, it's a young industry, but there's lots of venture dollars going into building tools to help businesses kind of get their arms around social media. And HubSpot does a fair amount of this stuff, but much simpler than, let's say, a Radian6 or a CoTweet.
What is your core product you sell? I've used your website grader literally in probably 100 presentations.
Yep.
To show how bad sites are, and then I go off to sell my services.
Yep.
So I'm just curious.
Okay. And for the record, he asked me what HubSpot does, and I'm not a sales guy, so I will give you the sort of non-salesy speech. So HubSpot provides marketing software for small businesses to help them do inbound marketing. It's a combination of content management, search tools, marketing analytics, and social media all kind of rolled into a single platform for what we call mere mortals, people who are getting started in the business. But you guys, most of you would not make good customers. Our best customers are B2B businesses, high lead value, and relatively non-sophisticated. They're just kind of getting into the game. Most of you would probably suck as customers because you're further along in your evolution than most of our customers would probably be.
We have a call center, so this is something that would be worthwhile.
Possibly. If you have a call center, you're probably bigger than most of our customers. We're very focused on the very low end of small businesses, like let's say 10 to 100 employees at our sweet spot.
Downloaded application?
No, it's completely web-based, so it's like a Salesforce.com. Yeah, software as a service on a subscription basis. Yeah, question?
You mentioned that the demographics tool on Facebook is a good way to target your traffic through media buys on Facebook. Are there any other suggestions you would make for people who want to make initial buys on Facebook?
Initial buys on Facebook, no. I'm not aware of any. Not that they don't exist, but I don't know of any offhand. I'm surprised that one exists, honestly. But yeah, sorry.
So what do you say to the CEO, small business owner that claims they don't have time to be personally involved in social media?
The community is working for you. Like over time, they're going to get bombarded with stuff. They're going to show up at cocktail parties. They're going to go to their little board meetings, other CEO forum events or whatever. There's lots of people, including HubSpot, working hard to kind of spread the belief and spread the religion around. There is money to be made here. We're red-blooded capitalists. We're not in it for the fun of it. And it works. And we've seen, and we've shared data, and we do this all the time on our blog, is that the value of blogging, the value of social media, because we have 2,000 customers now. We can go back and say, oh, here's what happened with the 400 customers that blogged, and here's how the number of leads varies based on frequency of blog writing and things like that. The good news is you're right in terms of it does work. It might take a little while to convince. I don't mean to be cliched about it. I think that does it for time. Thank you all for your time. The first 2 questions get a free book, by the way, and I'll be around for the rest of the day, so come grab me. And fill out those feedback forms.